Well, proximity to failure, that's number one, is very important to know how to gauge that. And, you have people that stay really far away from it, think they're hitting failure. And then you have the other crowd. You think you're not hitting it, but you're actually doing a whole bunch of grinders when you should have stopped maybe before. If I was going to, send you a clip, you'd probably be like, yeah, dude, you should have, you're kind of going too far with that. You're shaking and you're trembling in the seat on the leg press. Like, bro, why are you going that hard? Right. If you're trying to gauge this. But yeah, let's talk about proximity to failure. Why, if you're going to try this thing where it's like, let's spread out the volume and, to make it a little bit more appropriate based on some of the things you mentioned with when it's going to be a viable option. How can you better gauge that so that you can make this thing a little bit more successful and you don't run into a wall after, whether it be a few weeks, a few months, even if you are deloading? I mean, even a psychological wall, like fatigue, because you're just so fatigued. Let's break that down.
Yeah, I think proximity to failure is an interesting one, absolutely, because I think it's like you mentioned, like when we look at the studies, people who are pretty advanced have good understanding of how to gauge it fairly well. And I think experience is amazing for that. Like the more times you use it, the better you get to using a tool, like any tool in life. Higher reps is still more challenging. But again, like if you now and then take everything to the house, like to maybe like failure, or you take it to that rep where it's like you said, you're completely grinding. If you tried to do another rep, either you would fail or like it just would look not pretty at all.
Right.
Like you get that experience. And it can definitely be challenging. And this is actually part of the reason why I no longer split up my leg training. I used to do quads in the morning, hamstrings in the evening, vice versa. But I find after I've done like whatever main muscle group that is for the day, I don't want to go back to the gym later. Like I'm just that fatigued because leg training now in my kind of career is so fatiguing that I can't do that. So I think there are cases where you could do so much set volume, so many sets to failure, where if you try to consistently then come back in the evening and do more, you're just going to be too fatigued centrally. So it's just not going to work well for you. Whereas you need to have like a system that is logical in terms of progression and how you're working through things. So the way I like to set it up is my week one of a mesocycle is generally meeting minimum thresholds for hypertrophy. So I like to know, okay, I've met the minimum threshold for set volume for growth, there or thereabouts. I don't know exactly like it's this many sets, like it's there or thereabouts. I'm pretty certain I'm meeting that minimum threshold. Same for relative intensity. So then I know if I've met the minimums and like I'm in that scenario, getting a pretty decent trade-off of stimulus to fatigue. Fatigue's pretty low because I'm not training like balls out and I'm not training with many sets, but the stimulus also isn't super high either. And then as I go through my mesocycle, I kind of ramp up stimulus. With that inevitably comes fatigue as I approach closer to failure. I train with potentially more training volume as well. And then I get to the point where I am in that final week, which I just did last week, where I will be training like at my highest volumes, everything taken to like, basically I can't go anymore. So not RAR, there or thereabouts. And yeah, that's unsustainable training once you're at that point. So I have to then come back and deload, or I'm in an active recovery week this week. Whereas, so for the individual who's trying to train at maximum kind of set volume with maximum relative intensities, and like that is not a sustainable way of training because they will just burn out immediately. If you're training at like maximum relative intensities, you probably need to come down with your volume, and vice versa. Like you can get away with more volume if you train more time with kind of leaving reps in reserve. A lot of people, when they go through the approach that I'm using, they think 3 to 4 RAR, that's easy training and it's meant to be easy from week one. And if I'm recovering on time, that means I'm not sore, add more volume. And they get into a scenario where they've trained too easy week one and then they're always fresh. So they add just so much quantity, their quality goes down the pan. And so you'll see them in the gym and they'll be finishing sets and they're like, yeah, that was like 1 RAR.